Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. Now, for today's episode, we've got some crazy stuff to go through. Today's episode of Walking Up the Tower, we have episode 211 to 220. Now, this has the whole finding the hostages situation in it and the confrontation with Kesa. I don't know if it ends by the end of this year. I suspect that it all ends, but there is so much going on with this year that it's just going to be going crazy. So it starts off in episode 211 with Khun Ran eating a lightning pearl as he's about to engage. Ares Inertia. We then see that the two get into a quick little brawl, and we see that the skills are really at top level between these two. Remember, from the families, these are the top three strongest. Just give me a second. Okay, sorry about that. So we then see that Ares is really enjoying this year because Khun Ran is extremely talented for one of the Khun family, and he's still nothing next to his brother Aguero Agnes. And we see that basically in Ran's family, he was told that if he ever faces anybody from the Eri family, the secret is not to try and evade them or find the pattern in their attacks, but to withstand the attack and just hit them with an even more powerful attack. That is the way to defeat them, because it's almost impossible to defeat them when they have that Shinsu control. And we then find out that Ares Inertia is not a direct descendant. He is further down the line, so he isn't as powerful as a direct descendant. And that is why things are so crazy. We then see that Ares Inertia is drinking some liquor to fight. It's his weird way of powering up, and that's how he all of a sudden starts matching Ran. And then we see that he ignites, I think the name of this sword is Krishna. So he ignites Krishna, and basically they move the sword in a way that it normally wouldn't have. And all of a sudden we see a lighthouse appears to defend Ran against the attack, and we see that Ares Inertia is wondering what in the world just happened, when all of a sudden Ran just counter attacks him with the maximum that he has. We then see that Yukon is following Baum around like a slave, and we see that basically he's dragging Yukon with him all the way to Alphine. And we see that Yukon's whole idea is to get them to go to Alphine and have Alphine finish them off, because she's an Anima with a very special container, and that makes her almost impossible to defeat in her own area. And we see that Yukon is totally shocked when she agrees to tell them how to get to the gallery, and then she asks if they know if they can prove that they worthy of going in. And we see that that is where it ends, with Alphine just saying that Kesa is a prisoner in some type of restraint, and then we go on to episode 212. So 212. We then get Ender Rossi being confronted by one of the twins from the Lopobia family. And we then see that Alphine starts to spring her trap after she explains everything about Elaine. We see that she was set to become a princess of Jahad, and uh, that she was part of one of the families of the Lopobia family, and that she was one of the rare people born with special anime ability, the Grey Wolf. And we see that because of her, the Grey Wolf clan gained a lot of power, and that Elphine was her attendant, and she looked at her more closely than anyone else. And that she was a very dignified young girl who ran around carefree of anything around her. A week before she became the Princess of Jahad, an incident happened where she fell in love with a boy, and that broke her heart. And that's how come she lost the chance to become a Princess of Jahad, and that put her family in a bad situation. And that's how she ended up getting kicked out of that entire situation for herself. At which point she was basically expelled from it, and her family was put under a massive amount of pressure. And the special labor punishment that she was sentenced to on climbing the tower was to actually take over the Namehunt station and use it in this way to pay off her debt. And we see that is why Kesa was here. Then we see that Alfine eventually climbed up the tower and she found her in this place and decided to serve her again. And that this vicious cycle has continued for a very long time. And basically, this is what she's asking if they can do anything to counteract it. Because every time that Elaine tries to pay off her debt, her family spends all the money because it's not enough to pay it all off in one lump sum. And basically, there's something else that's going to go on behind the situation, behind all of this, in the secret that the Grey Wolf family has been blowing the money away and having parties and enjoying all the money all at once. It then switches over to a fight between Leela and Ender Rossi. And we see that Leela wants to find out what's the entire situation with Jovial Grace and Ender Rossi Jahad. And we see that Ender Rossi is in a real bad situation because if they find out anything about the true situation, things are going to go crazy. So we see that Leela decides that she wants to fight Jovial Grace, and that is where episode 212 ends. We go on to episode 213, where Alphine has now trapped them in her tank with her Enoma, the Shadow Fox. At which point we see that she was just a projection by her observer, and she runs out of the room as the Shadow Fox attacks. Now, the Shadow Fox, once linked to your shadow, can consume all of your Shinsu. We see that her sister Sheila decided that she'll steal Rossi's companions' names and force them to tell her what the relationship between Jovial Grace and Rossi is, and that's how they're going to do everything. So we then see that Shibisu ends up fighting Sheila Jahar. And then we see that this is a real bad situation, and all of a sudden she pulls out a sword to confront Shibisu. And this is where Shibisu starts fighting her, which is a crazy, dangerous fight. We then see that Yukon is also going to get killed by Alphine, and that she decided to just kill him, and he goes through a whole desperate situation as he speaks there before all of this gets done. And then we see that the Shadow Fox heals itself instantly when it's attacked, and then it eats Yukon. So we see that Kun realizes that attacking this Anima is quite impossible, and he realizes that without a tank to control it, the thing shouldn't be able to be here. So there has to be a tank somewhere. And we see that the room was specially made so that it could only be opened from the outside. And we see that Kun comes up with a crazy plan to use the thorn to gather up all the Shinsu within the room and move it to another place, which would force the fox to move with the Shinsu concentration. And Kun already figured it out that the room was actually the tank, and he decided he was going to use his lighthouse as the tank after this year to hold the fox. And he instantly starts doing that, and we see that Alphine goes on basically thinking that Kesa is never going to get caught. And a few seconds later, she gets caught by Bam Kun and the other regular who they had with them. So we see that Kun's plan was that the moment the density of Shinsu got too low, the fox would jump straight into the lighthouse where all of the Shinsu was being placed, and that they just had to call a regular from the outside to get them out. And we see that Bam once again asks Alphine how to get to Kesa. At this point, we go to 214, and then we see that Alphine decides that she was going to kill herself. Bam uses reverse flow control to stop her from doing it. He steals her name, and then he orders her to say everything. And he also orders her not to kill herself. We then see Elaine is pondering on her memories of why her parents, of how her parents treated her when she failed that little trick, that little trap that was given to her to prove that she's worthy of being a princess. And we see that Alphine sends a message to Kesa that the others are on their way through the escalator. And as we see Bam and the rest of them heading towards the elevator, we see Shibisu is blocking the elevator, and he then basically is holding a Shinsu bomb, and he's basically going to throw it at them. And we then see that Rossi and Leela get into a heavy fight. Now, honestly, this was one of the most silly moves ever. If Shimizu confronted Bam, Bam would kill him in an instant. Bam is so powerful that he could just reverse flow control him, even if he uses observers and a lighthouse because of the thorn. And this is just the reality. Bam doesn't even have to use his thorn. He could pull out 8 Bang, destroy any type of defense Shimizu has, and kill him with just his regular state. That's how powerful Bam is, just regular. And just regular, Bam probably is good enough to fight the Princess of Jahad, to not a draw, but to actually beat her. That's how crazy it is at this point. We then see that Hats and Sheila are busy going at their fight. And we see that Hat's new sword that is moving around with actually reaches its limit. At that point, we see that he starts thinking about how Enderossi is climbing with them and how she doesn't sever her ties with people who are destined to be her enemies in the future. At this point, we see Hats pulls out his ignition weapon. And we see that the way that Alphine had told Bam to get there was actually a decoy because there's a bomb in the elevator to kill people who come that way. And that the actual way to enter it is through a floating island that can approach from the outside. And then all of a sudden we see Bam arrive through the window to fight Kesa. And we see that she's wondering how in the world is he alive. So we then move on to episode 215. Things are now getting a little bit more crazy. So we see that Bam basically enters in because he found out about the bomb on the escalator and he ends up here and he is about to fight Kesa for the first time. Now this is the first proper Kesa vs Bam fight that we're ever going to get. And as this one here goes down, we see Bam hops in and he says, can I ask for a favor before we fight? Basically, he makes a quick deal. I'm not going to go into it right now. I'll go into it after this 10 chapters are up. At this point, we see that the Dan family member sees that there's some crazy guys approaching where he is. And we see that Wariyun, Sachifeka, and Boro are on their way to the hostages. They're going to retrieve them. And we see that they fight GM, who's a steel human who decides he's going to fight against Novik, and Novik fights him quite quickly and basically defeats him. And we see that Wariyun just keeps moving on until they reach the Dan member, and all of a sudden this whole thing becomes a little bit more crazy, and he basically says if they move any closer, he'll kill the hostages inside the tank by filling it up with water. And at that same moment, we see that Wariyun explains that she has the key because she's already got it because they've already defeated the Keyman. And we see that Wariyun communicates to Kun saying that all the hostages have been saved, and then they give the message to Bam. So Bam is now totally calm, and he decides to go full force against Kesa. And that is where 215 ends, and we'll go on to 216. Now, there's a lot that's going to go down in this fight. So, the moment that this fight begins, we get a rehash of where it ended off the last time, with the invisible infantry and the armor infantry coming into play. We see Bam using some crazy attacks against armor infantry and shattering pieces of it. We also see some of his crazy wave controller techniques. And we see that Kesa even comments that he is definitely a gem that is still being refined into his potential. And we see that Kesa decides that he doesn't speak like a Slayer candidate. And we see that she explains that she danced on glass ceilings and all the crazy metaphors and how things were when she was a child, and that she didn't realize how heavy the responsibility was on her shoulders. And we see that she says, "Isn't it the same for you?" And then she pulls out her weapon inventory and she starts off with some crazy invisible items. Sorry. We see Bam evades them and he instantly just manages to pull off this crazy amount of fighting that is really setting things into a pace. Just 1 second. Okay, so she ends up explaining the whole thing about how she danced on glass floors, not realizing that there were people under her feet. And now she's learned to be very careful, and then she starts attacking. And we see that she's going to keep up this role as Kesa until her family forgives her. And we see that at this point, we see that it switches over to Ares Inertia, and he's been defeated by Ran, basically. So we see that Ran and Ares have a little talk. And he explains that Kesa was really powerful and she has 2 secret abilities up her sleeves, and that's how she wins generally. And her ability as Enema is her secret wolf weapon called Fenrir. And you see that this attack is then used on Bam in the middle of the fight because it's swapping between the two. And this creature has 2 abilities in that sense. Fenrir isn't the secret power. His abilities are. His bite causes wounds that cannot be healed by anybody but the Enema user, or by killing the Enema user. And he can also switch places with his Enema user. Those are his 2 secret techniques. So he ends up biting Bam, and Kesa says it is over, and that is where 216 ends. Then we get into 217, and we see that Bam starts fighting the wolf, and he can't really attack it because it's only an image of the Enema. It's not how it works. It's very crazy. And we see that Kun realizes that the blood is still pouring, and we see that Kesa explains that the wolf is her little secret weapon and that it's a spirit wolf. That is what it is in terms of a creature, and it's really rare and it's a really powerful creature. It can even bite through the skin of rankers. And so she explains that he'll keep bleeding from those wounds until this fight is over. So basically, he's already lost. And then we see that the regular who is with Kun basically explains it after they've seen all of this. And he basically says there's another power that he can't remember, which I already told us, which I already said in terms of what it is. We then see that the fight starts amping up again. And we see that Baum starts using more and more of his techniques to evade the wolf. And we see that all of a sudden he gets caught by a fishing line, and the dog starts attacking him once more. And we see that there's an opening on Kesa as Baum is about to attack. That at that point we get a quick switch over to Ares, and he explains that she's from the Lopovia family and that there's another ability. And we see that Ares decides that he wants Kun Ran to kill him. So Kun Ran decides to swallow the second Shinsu Pearl, which will throw his power into total overload. So he's going to give Ares Inertia the final stand that he wanted, and he fires off his crazy attack at him to finish him off. And we see the whole story of Ares Inertia and Kesa, and how basically she said that somebody would buy him because he's really valuable, and if they don't, he can just be one of the 10 bosses till they see his value. And we see that that is where episode 217 ends, and we're on to 218. Now, these are some of the best fights that you can get, and we see Baum versus Kesa in the end. Now remember, there's Leela and Sheila fight, and there's this fight. So we are going to have alterations between that throughout this year. I'm actually going to explain everything right at the end because this is really awesome. So we see that the fight continues. I'm not even going to bother with the whole delay with that stupid regular. And we see Baum attacks in a spot where he sees a weak point, and all of a sudden, Kesa switches with a wolf and it bites down on Baum, and Kesa gets behind him. At that point, he tries to steal his name when Baum uses his technique, and he starts attacking her again when she switches again with the enema to bite him a second time. So now he suffered 3 of these blows from the wolf. And we see that there was one other thing that Kesa had up her sleeve. And Rossi didn't know that the name stealing can happen if you keep your hand on the waist of a person. Something that wasn't explained, and we see that this here keeps going and the fight keeps going against Baum. And we see that Baum starts going into this crazy focus while he's still fighting. And we see that Baum is getting more and more in tune uh, with his powers. And he starts feeling the flow of the Shinsu, everything moving around him, and he can even move better than he could before. And we see that he's getting sharper and sharper, feeling more and more of the power. And then all of a sudden, he reaches out and grabs one of her invisible inventory and breaks the weapon. And we see that at this point, Kesa admits that he's truly talented. We see that Kesa explains that he is super unique. He is stronger than any other regular she's ever met, even those in the main family in the direct line. That's how crazy he is. And then we see that it switches over to Sheila and Hutz, where Hutz is using Dong Hei. And basically, he explains that it's an ignition weapon and he hasn't yet even ignited it, and it's already crazy. That is where 218 ends, and we're on to 219. And we see that Hutz is actually afraid of Dong Hei because the moment he ignites it, he doesn't even think he can control it. And we see that Shibisu shows up and he confronts Sheila and he says that basically Viol is fighting Kesa and she's about to lose. And we see that Shibisu basically threatens Sheila that if this happens, it might look like they helped Viol defeat Kesa, and that's how it's looking. And basically, at this point, we see Shibisu unveils their whole plan and how they're working with another princess and how they were forcing Enderosi to either join them or go after somebody else. And we see that this was all about a fight between princesses on a higher floor, Eri Rose or Hendrock Gledmary Jahad. And we see that Shibisu basically says, basically Sheila tells Shibisu that he's quite right on the reasoning, he just got the two names wrong. And then they reveal who they actually going with. And we see that the fight between Kesa and Bam gets even more crazy as Bam starts getting even more powerful and more control over what he is doing. And we see that Kesa starts using even more weapons against Bam, and he just starts destroying all of her needles that she's using with the real inventory. And then all of a sudden, we see that Bam breaks through all of her defenses. And we get this whole flashback and movement thing as things start going crazy. And we see that Bam uses some of his more crazy attacks, knocking out Kesa. And we see that he lectures her a little bit and he asks her, does she even remember her name? And she can't remember it. And we see that all of this is going on. And we see that she can't remember her name. That's where episode 219 ends. We then get episode 220, where everything has now finished off. We see everybody is looking around at the aftermath of this battle. And Bam is now over Kesa, who has been totally defeated. And he says he's not stealing her name. He's going to buy her name. And he had an idea on how to free her. He's going to pay off her debt all at once. And in return, she's going to pay off. She's going to return Ender Rossi's name and say that Ender Rossi is the one who fought her and beat her. And we see that Balm calls her by her name, Elaine. And this is who Elaine truly is. I'm just going to show that for this quick picture. And then we see Leela and Sheila contact each other, and they see that Kai'Sa lost, and they decide to leave. And we see that Leela and Sheila actually teamed up with a high ranker princess, and that this is something going even more crazy. Then she contacts another princess called Maria. And we see that she tells Hutz that if they ever meet again and he bluffs, she'll kill him. We then see that Balm is being reeled out by Khun on one of his lighthouses, and that he has been totally healed from all the wounds that he sustained in that fight. And we see that the regular who's with him decides that he'll go with whatever Behol's decision was. And then we see Ender Rossi shows up, and she starts going crazy with Balm, trying to get the name of Kai'Sa from him. And we see that she's not listening when he says that he has her name. And we see that Waryun spoke of what's happening likely, like the figure that they're going to be paying is pennies to a Slayer candidate, and that's something which they're just going to hand over, and that's how things are going to go. We then see that the whole chaos and the princess who's been working with Leela and Sheila was Khun Mashni Jahan. And we see that a whole lot of stuff is being explained at that moment. And we see that Maria was also mentioned at it. Then we get the whole auction as it's about to start. And we see that Kai'Sa honors her word and she steps out and shows off her skills. Actually, she just steps out. That is where episode 220 ends. And that's going to be about it from me today. So catch you all in the next one and have a great day.